Hello, this is Coach Wilson, and this is Unit 2, Day 7. Now, today's journal is going to be what was the first document that existed to govern America. We're going to kind of move back into uh, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all those things today. And so, why did the document that preceded this need to be replaced? What was that document? Tell me a little bit more about it. Today, we're going to be talking about the Constitutional Convention. And the Constitutional Convention was a meeting to try and fix the Articles of Confederation. The meeting was conducted using 55 delegates from 12 different states. Rhode Island refused. They actually liked the Articles of Confederation, and for good reason. And their leader was George Washington, who was elected to preside over the convention. And the members that were not able to attend included John Adams, Ben Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison. Oh, excuse me, they were all present, and then Jefferson was not able to attend because he was negotiating the treaty with um, Britain. Was negotiating some treaty with Britain or something. Can't remember exactly why Jefferson was overseas, but there was something he was negotiating. I think he was negotiating about the fact that their military had still not left even after the treaty was signed almost 4 years before. So here's a look at the delegates meeting around. Okay, you can see George Washington presiding over the meetings. All right, and after a short debate, delegates agreed to scrap the Articles of Confederation. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, was the primary writer and will be one of our future presidents. Some problems in creating the Constitution. Number one was the issue of representation. Number two was the issue of slavery. Number three was, what kind of leadership are we going to have? Four was how do we create trade and who regulates it? And then five was the system of checks and balances and trying to ensure that no one group had too much power. Now, the two plans they came up with, the first was the Virginia plan, and the representation was based on population. What that meant was that you would have, just like we do today, with a Senate and a House of Representatives, but each of them would be based on population. So they would have, if you're in North Carolina and we had 14 million people, then let's say for every million people you got one representative. So North Carolina would have 14. Well, let's say that Rhode Island had 4 million people. Well, they would only get 4 representatives. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does, okay? Because you can't answer back to me. But that was called the big state plan because it favored states that had huge populations. Now, the other plan on the table was the New Jersey plan, which was equal representation. It would have been a one house system, which would have meant you'd either have the Senate or the House of Representatives, but not both. And it was a small state plan, which was unfair to larger population states because each state would have had the same amount of representation, which is what we had under the Articles. Now, the Great Compromise, as it comes to be known, was the Connecticut Compromise, and it was written from a man from Connecticut, Roger Sherman, and it was a bicameral system, so Senate and a House of Representatives, like what we have, but one would be based on population and one on equal representation, to where you had a true, fair structure to the government. All right, now I'm not going to go through all of this, but this kind of gives you a quick overview of each plan and what came together in the Great Compromise. Now, one of the other issues was slavery. One of the compromises they came up with here was the Three-Fifths Compromise. And it said that for every 5 enslaved people, they would count as 3 free people in determining representation and taxation. The reason for this was that free states wanted the slaves to count towards taxes because it would have hurt the southern states and their economies, and would have hurt the slave trade. The slave states wanted the slaves to count towards population because it would have helped them to have more representation in Congress. But obviously they didn't want as taxes, the same as the North didn't want them to count as population. So you've got two different sides there that are fighting over just essentially power, even though neither of them really had the best interest of slaves. Now, here's another chart, kind of gives you an idea of what they were arguing about. Should give you a little bit better understanding. I normally print these out for you, but obviously with everything going, we can't do that. Now, as far as trade regulation, not going to go through this because this will not be very significant to your test, but you may want to look over this. Southern states favored state control over the regulation of all trade. They feared a federal ban on the slave trade, which is why southern states were taking issue to trade in the first place. And then they were afraid of a tax on agricultural exports. And the northern states, they wanted the federal government to have the power to collect duties and tariffs because they knew that it would help the economy, but they also felt it would hurt the slave trade. And what you're going to see, and the most important thing here, is that there's no ban on the slave trade for 20 years um, in America. So that's going to put us all the way up to about 1807 before we're going to come to this issue again. Then we're going to come to the presidential compromise, and this is how they decided to finally elect a president, which was through indirect election through the Electoral College system, which we still have today. 4-year terms of service, and there were no limits to terms of service. So you could continue to serve as president for as long as you wanted, as long as you kept getting reelected. It will not be until the 22nd Amendment in 1951 that regulated it to 2 terms, but we've only had one president that actually served more than 2 terms, and that was FDR, the president right before that was made a law. Now, a framework for limited government was formed. Popular sovereignty was kind of the way we chose to go, which means rule by the people. The people vote on things, and then the representatives do what the people want. The representative system of government that we formed meant that we had elected officials who represent the voice of the people, and that created what we know as federalism. And federalism is just divided government power between the national and state government. So if you look at the pyramid there, you have the federal government, which is the top. State government answers to them. The county government answers to the state. And then the local government, which would be like Newton and Conover's government, answers to the county. So Newton and Conover answer to Catawba County. Catawba County answers to North Carolina. North Carolina answers to the U.S. government. All right, and this just kind of shows the different branches which you learned in civics. Not going to spend a ton of time with that, but the legislative branch, which makes the laws, the executive branch, which enforces the laws, and the judicial branch, which interprets those laws. So here are your 3 questions for today. Make sure you get those answered in your notes, and then finally here are your 4 vocabulary words. That's all I have for you today. Please let me know if you have any issues, and I'll talk to you soon.